This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Spectra 1964, Atom Audio, Samply, Izotope, and API. You're hearing my voice right now on the API 3122V mic pre and Spectra 1964 C610 comp limiter through Izotope RX, Ozone, and Neutron, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. So get ready to rock.
Hopefully that will put a trend out there of people playing instruments again. I mean, the key is just do what you believe in doing. Don't let anyone else tell you that that's not cool or that's not relevant. Like if you love rock and roll, if you love metal, if you love rap, if you love hip hop, just do what you love doing. Put a lot of attention to that. But always know that trends happen, they come and go. That's all I can say.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. The Spectra 1964 C610 comp limiter brings fast, clean, quiet compression and limiting to your recordings and mixes. The C610 includes the famous Spectra 101 amplifier used in legendary studios like Stax, Ardent, and Record Plant. I love my C610s for drums, vocals, guitars, and especially bass, which helps me get the perfect low end in my mixes. And you can make your mixes rock at Spectra1964.com. When your band hits the studio, it's smart to have all the songs, mixes, and notes in one place. But figuring out how to share all the files can be frustrating. There's always somebody in the band who can't seem to log in or wants to use a different platform. Samply App makes it easy to collaborate and communicate by creating a shared project so the whole band can get organized before the session. Just upload a voice memo, lyric sheet, song charts, photo, video, mixes, masters, or even invoices and start commenting. Sign up for your free account now with 25 gigs of storage and unlimited projects, and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade at Samply.app. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lij Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Marc Daniel Nelson, a Latin Grammy nominated producer and mixer. His credits over 20 plus years include artists like Fleetwood Mac, Jason Mraz, Colbie Caillat, music for films like Solo, Blade Runner, Fractured, The Expanse, Point Break, and The Last Full Measure, and more. Marc has been showcased on the cover of Audio Solutions magazine, in addition to articles in Mix, Shore, and Business magazine, has won Marc Award win, and was nominated for the French Academy Award for Best Score for the film Amanda. Marc's also been creating a ton of cool studio tutorial videos in the recent time frame over at Produce Like a Pro, and you can catch a lot of his videos right on YouTube there where he's teaching you how to do stuff in the studio. So we might chat about that. You can also catch his last couple of podcast episodes on Recording Studio Rockstars for episode 168 and 271. And we will hopefully have those in the show notes below, where he talked about his background in music and also his amazing and portable at times film mixing setup. I think the last time we spoke was in 2020. So happy to have Marc back to see what's new over in your mixing world. Marc, please welcome Marc Daniel Nelson back to Recording Studio Rockstars. Marc, are you ready to rock again?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, man.
Oh yeah, dude. Nice to have you back, man. I always reveal a little bit about how we do these in advance. That we're starting to get a little bit of a warm day here. Are you enjoying beautiful sunshine out in LA?
Yeah, it's a hot one today. It might even be record. I think we're getting 88 today. Nice. 87, it says.
LA is a place where it could be 87, but you can still go out wearing full jeans, a long sleeve shirt, and a jacket.
Yeah. No, not a lot of humidity, which is good.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why I think there's so much fashion in LA, and maybe it's a little different here in Nashville. It's because you can actually wear
toasty
clothes
down there. What's the weather down there today?
At the moment, it's probably 60 something outside. So, not quite 70 yet. We're still cooling down, but we don't need to get too deep into it because it'll be totally different by the time people listen to this.
Yeah.
But I enjoy it because what I do is I give myself a real bulk focus time to sit in my podcast studio and do a bunch of interviews with people like yourself and really dig deep into making records. And I just get really excited about it in the studio again. So what's new with you, man? What's have you been hunkered down in your studio? And I know you've been really dialing in kind of some incredible mix templates and stuff. Let me begin, if it's all right, by asking you, A, what's new in your studio when you just sort of look around yourself, and then B, what projects are you excited about that you may have been focused on recently?
It's a weird time switch. The last time we talked, I was, arms deep into the beginning phase of COVID. And at that time, it was probably April 2020 when we talked last.
Might have been, yeah.
It was very early in the pandemic. And I was up in Washington State at my parents' house near Seattle. And because no one knew what was happening. And I was there for 3 months, worked on a couple of films, bunch of albums, stuff like that. And, after that, I kind of figured out, okay, I think there's a way to create a system that I can travel in. So through the next 2 years, I was going from Los Angeles to Arizona. There was a house there I could stay at for a while. And great big house, modern facility.
Never
cool,
hot.
Everything. Very
Never
hot,
right?
Very hot. But at the same time, totally fine because I was working during the day and walking with my dog in the early evenings. And so it was really nice to be able to travel, and get away from things. The first year was a little hectic. Trying to be locked down in Los Angeles was a little tense.
Yeah, I bet.
And then, coming back and putting a lot more time into Los Angeles. And, I got into working with Warren at Produce Like a Pro because in the beginning of COVID, it was one of those things that I just wanted to make sure that people were getting healthy breaks, basically healthy breaks, because everyone was just freaking out. No one knew what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay. So I started making these videos. The first video was already done, and it was going to go on a different platform, a well-known platform that I actually didn't. I kind of pulled it and said, look, I'm going to just put this out for free because people are not doing well mentally. And then it did well, and then I just started enjoying making it. It was really nice therapy around making projects because mixing records and mixing films, and I produce like feature stuff as well outside of music, and doing all that stuff. I found that, editing and, doing all the fun stuff that you used to like doing wasn't fun anymore. So I had to find some other things. So I started doing these tutorials just for fun. And I think I've done 38, 39. There's another one out.
Wow.
Actually today, I think it's came out. But I think the biggest thing is it was really fun. And I get a lot of people that just are super grateful. And honestly, I've never been the kind of guy that holds his tricks and shit. Like, honestly, it's ridiculous. These people that are threatened by the idea that their work is going to be taken. I mean, They're just not good enough then. And I don't like the idea that someone else can take the album from me, but that's part of the game. And I think a lot of it is just helping as many people make good recordings and good mixes. And I don't know, it's bizarrely satisfying because I am a terrible student.
Yeah, but you're a great teacher. It's
But
really
the
clear
teaching
watching
method, I
you
guess,
that
that
you're having
people
fun.
say I have is just kind of learning the way I learned, which is not traditional. It's just figuring out different ways to understand how to hear or learn. And that's it. I mean, I do quite a lot of mixing albums again, and film stuff happens. I think I've got 7 albums I'm working on currently. 1 film just finished. So, do you hear that lawnmower? It's like driving. I can hear it. I wonder if I should tilt the mic.
I just hear the pin drop after you mentioned how many projects you're working on simultaneously.
Oh, well. No, I think the biggest thing is that's the fun part. I was focused on film, and then I'm going back into album work. And the cool part is just working on a lot of projects from all across the world. I just did an album with a band from Hamburg. Their band name was Jeremy Days, and they were a big band in the 90s, and they broke up for years, had families and everything, and then COVID brought them back together. And it was a really good rock album, and I think they just released it. So that's a little plug.
Yeah,
I was really happy with that. I can't remember what German label they're on, but they were really, really good rock, like very 90s, kind of remind me of Semisonic, kind of remind me of that really great pop rock era. And songs were killer.
What if I was to just put you on the spot and say, what are some production or mixing elements that, are a crucial part of that kind of production that kind of rock production that you just mentioned?
It's interesting because that stuff doesn't happen a lot. It's like if I went down my list of sounds, it would be between acoustic to hard pop, like electric hard pop, like electronic, and modern stuff, and then very slow songwriting. I mean, it's just crazy the amount of changing genres come through the door these days, and I'm totally up for that. That's like the whole reason why I got into it. And for this stuff, it's been 4 months for that album specifically that I really liked. It was just good songs. It was really good songs with rock and roll and good pop melodies. So there wasn't a ton of tricks that needed to be done. They did a lot
about the flanger.
Exactly. There is flanger in that, actually.
All
Chorus
right.
and flanger. I think a lot of it was they did it all. One guy lives in Los Angeles, the bass player, and then the rest live in Germany. And they did it all from COVID. So it was just hard kind of getting a band to sound like a band. So there was all these little things I had to learn to make them sound more like they're playing together. And the hard part is, technology-wise, it's real drums and everything, but I feel like, everyone's using these amp simulating amplifiers, and there's something weird that happens in the mix when you're combining like a drum set, like a real drum set, and a direct bass and direct guitars, essentially modeled IR impulse guitar modelers. And it's weird, and it's not reverb to fix it, and it's not delay and stuff. I think a lot of it is honestly the low mids. It's weird. I used to whack off so much electric low mids just in mixing, and I feel like with all the new the modeled guitar sounds, it's like you need to add more just to get a little bit, because that air that happens on speakers, even when you palm mute a Les Paul going through a Marshall, you get like, it's like punching your chest.
Yeah. And we're a little bit overloaded with real sounds.
Yeah. It's funny that used to be like, oh, that's bad. And now I'm trying to get a little bit more of that out of stuff. So there's just a lot of playing that you have to do. Our bass was interesting, really fun to use on guitars, just to get a little bit of 110 punch out of it. So there was like a lot of new things I was kind of learning, and I don't know. It was interesting. I ended up a couple weeks ago just finished another mix. I did 2 songs with Need to Breathe.
Mm-hmm.
That I think they're putting the second one out as a single. I don't remember. But the point was, it was like completely 2 different types of songs. The first one was a very acoustic breakdown. The second one was kind of a mixture of the two. Same band, Bear as a singer is insane. And he just kind of blends into whatever kind of genre styles they sing to. But like, I don't know if there's like tricks that you apply specifically to genres more than just I think this goes back to the rule of kind of how I hear things. So I compare them to music that I already know. I don't know if you do that. Do you do that?
Yeah. Sure, I do that. I mean, I do a little bit of genre leaping, but not so much, you know. Most of what
I
I
do
might
a lot of rock stuff.
Well, I mean, like most of the people I would record would show up with a band full of real instruments, you know. And then I love all the different variations of music, and I'm always trying to incorporate them, but I tend to experiment, you know, like on my own stuff and creating and stuff. But like, you know, for example, when I think about stuff that you might do for a genre, like when would you bust out chorus on the bass, you know?
Well, I think that's what I'm going to say is when I hear a reference, so when I set up my session and I'm ready to dive in, I listen to the reference first just to kind of get in the mood. But I really try to stay away from hearing anything until that moment of hit play. Mm-hmm. I really do believe you can fry out your creative juices just prepping and doing stuff. That's why I have like a super system where I don't even listen to stuff. I can kind of just, if it's not labeled correctly, I send it back, ask them to label it, just so I don't have to really dive in and listen to stuff, because I think you do fry some of that. So when I listen to the ref, the first instinct that pops in my mind is probably some song that it reminds me of. So if it reminds me of, let's say, Jeremy Days, reminds me of that amazing Semisonic album that had Closing Time and all of D&D and all these amazing rock songs, then I'm going to think about the production value that it reminds me of. It's the same thing as if like there's a drum part on a rock song that it could just be the drum part that reminds me of Nirvana or Dave Grohl. Mm-hmm. And the fact that there's this ambient on a kick drum or something. And so I put that on. I don't know why a lot of people don't do that. I do know there's a lot of people that do, but I also know that there's people that just their mind doesn't kind of adapt that way. And that's okay. I'm just saying in the sense that like for reverbs and all this stuff, I have always used it as, what does this remind me of? I can just search my head of like my previous tricks and stuff, knowing instantly how to get those sounds based on that. Instead of going, this is a country record.
Right.
I know I'm going to need to get this exact snare sound. It doesn't matter, because honestly, we're trying to be innovative and creative in creating new things. And if we keep repeating over and over, you can't get out of that slump. So there's nothing wrong with taking a sub element of a hip hop song and putting it into a country song. If it seems to work well. I don't know if that makes sense. I seem to go in tangents and I go into circles and I try to figure out, what did I just say?
No, I like that. And it reminds me of the many times that I might be working on a project and I might hear like just a musical element, just like a melodic piece or a chord progression or a harmonic like lift or something. And I'm like, what does that remind me of? What does that remind? And then if I finally figure it out, it's like so far away from the actual kind of music we're doing in that moment. I'm like, oh, that, that reminds me of Bridge Over Troubled Water. And here I am doing like a heavy rock song or something. But the cool thing about that is, like hearing you describe it, it's like, let your memory of these different sounds and parts kind of remind you of what to do with it, instead of feeling like it needs to fit a cookie cutter mold for the whole production.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it could just be never ending, to be honest. And I think if you just keep listening to music, you can get pointers. I guess you would call it pointers.
Yeah.
off of what and how to be creative. I mean, there's little things, little tiny things like ambience on kick drums can be such a signature part of your mix. I mean, think of Andy Wallace's Nevermind mixes. I mean, there was all these really great ambience on those drums. Obviously, Butch Vig recorded really, really amazing drums in Studio City with Dave Grohl.
Yeah.
But it was those ambience on the kick and snare that made me, as a kid, I just remember being like, what is going on with those drums? Because it was just something very unique about that. And that's super simple, to be able to pull up an ambient kind of specific character of your ambient or triggering an ambience and using that as a technique. So there's all these elements. It's same as like kick drums. I mean, I mix a lot of trailer stuff still for movies, like action movies. So it requires a lot of stuff. And one of my main tricks still is to involve a standard, boring, kind of specific rock kick drum that has a perfect amount of low end, like 30 hertz, and a perfect amount of attack. And I blend that in every time things hit. And, you know, I've felt that gives me the exact clip I need on my limiter when it's, you know, at a level that it needs to be at. If that makes sense, you know, because the proper low end and stuff like that. And I guess people consider that to be, I wouldn't say cheating, but boring maybe, or something. I don't know what words
we need benchmarks, though. We need benchmarks in production or in a song or in creative endeavors and in creating art. And to me, you're just describing that kick drum becomes a sonic frequency benchmark and a dynamic benchmark that trailer mix might be built around.
Well, there's a lot of people that are like, look, I don't want templates or I don't want presets. I want to be able to be creative and create that. And I'm like, I'm in full agree with you, but I believe that I don't want to be spending 15 minutes on a kick drum and then worry about an hour and a half later, why is my low end still not right? I would rather be focusing, getting that locked, and then focusing on the cool little ear tricks or automation that spends a lot of time on takes a lot of time, automation. So I'd rather be putting all my creative focus into those things than dealing with like low end and making sure that that's 1,000,000%. Because there's times you get samples or drum sets or whatever that are just terrible and you can't fix them. And you spend all this time trying to just fix it. And like, then you listen to it and you're like, I guess it's unique, but I mean, I'm not replacing stuff. I'm just adding and augmenting it. Yeah. So it's like, it's still creating the sound. It's still there. It's just creating a low frequency. I think Chad Blake does that too, where he uses a specific low end sample for his bottom.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. I know he uses a lot of SansAmp for sure.
Yeah. I think he uses,
or has
Drumagog kick drum, like a standard normal Drumagog sample in there because it has a great amount of low end and he just augments a little bit. I mean, I'm not saying he does it on everything, but I've seen him do it on a couple things, specifically different projects. So I think he has a consistency and I just like spending more of my time dealing with the shit that I want to deal with, not the stuff that I think, you know, it sounds very fun, but I've mixed a drum set so many times in 20 years that I just don't, I get really antsy and ADD if it's not coming together soon. So if I have to use samples or templates or tricks to get it quick so I can put way more time in the creative aspect of the song, then that's okay.
Atom Audio introduces the all-new A7V monitor with rotatable HPS waveguide for the accelerated ribbon tweeter and advanced onboard DSP-based room correction using the included A-Control software or optional SonarWorks software and measurement mic, allowing you to tune your speakers for your room, your mix position, and your ears anytime you want. Get the extended 5-year warranty for monitors that will improve as your studio improves at atomaudio.com. If you're ready to upgrade your studio to the famous sound of API's large format consoles, then you're ready for the Box, a small format console featuring the same analog circuitry and original 2520 op-amp design that made API famous for more than 50 years. Record through 8 world-class mic pre-channels, mix through 24 smooth as glass faders, and upgrade your home studio to legendary status. API now offers a virtual console experience, allowing you to get a personalized online demo of the Box at apiaudio.com. Yeah, I like to think of it like if you're building a house, you got to start with a solid foundation. You don't need to reinvent the foundation every time. You just need something that's strong and it's going to hold up the rest of it. And if you get to that point where you're making all those automation moves, which are so time consuming to create the, dynamic and expression of the whole song and mix. And then you go back and go, oh, I need to tweak that kick drum or that bass more. It sort of messes up the stuff that's on top of it too, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, obviously you have to kind of wing it just to get this leaf blower. This guy's getting his leaf
We don't even hear it, man. Oh, Technology. Man. Skype, it's so good.
Exactly. Love it. No, I mean, I think a lot of it is just you have to adapt to, whatever you're trying to go after. But I mean, I would rather spend more time on the automation for sure than compressing vocals, or just because it's been done, it's almost mind numbing at that point. And what happens is, and I've said this a couple of times already today, but what happens is you start losing your momentum, your creative output.
Yeah.
And I have time to prep sessions and stuff. I really don't, but I enjoy prepping sessions and stuff. But I would rather pay somebody, one of my guys, to do it so I can unzip it and then start it super fresh, knowing exactly where it's going to go. Now, he's not doing any mixing or anything. All he's doing is doing outputs and stuff. Now, going back to the macros and stuff like that we were talking about earlier, there are ways to have an automatic prep to an extent, but there's little things that I think the human still needs to do. And plus it keeps, younger, passionate guys in some kind of work to help them prep stuff, and they learn from that. And I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know where we're going with this, but I mean, I think a lot of it is just, I think a biggest point of mixing is literally like writing a song. You have to find that moment that it just clicks, and sometimes it doesn't click, and you have to be okay with that. But you also have to use your advantage of saying, okay, I only have probably a 45-minute super creative window before I start, getting ADD, and I have to take a break, and then it resets sometimes, but sometimes it doesn't. And so trying to get all that juices going right away, because most people know that you should be able to get a mix going relatively good in the first 40 minutes.
Yeah. Well, so 2 thoughts come to mind for me. One is when you're talking about that, people pushing back on, I don't want it to be template. I don't want to have boundaries. If the pushback is like, I don't want to have any restrictions on my art, then I think that can be missing the point of art. So like when I was in architecture school, we studied the Bauhaus School of Design in Germany, and we were learning about poster design and stuff, and designing a brilliant poster is all about working with those boundaries and pushing against the boundaries of your poster. It's something so simple as that. Like you've got a piece of paper that's this big, so or a phone app or something like that,
Well, there's rules and stuff you'd like to follow, and some you can break, but it's not like you're going to tune your guitar. I mean, some people do, I guess, but most people are still tuning their guitar relatively the same. So there is a rule that you're like, okay, I got to tune my guitar to make sure that I can play what I need to play when I play it. So
Have you tried taking a guitar and tuning all the strings to the same note?
No.
Actually,
I just got a
I'm not
couple
sure
new
if I've done
guitars too. I've been on the get back kick. So I've been buying guitars again.
You
Just
got yourself a Hofner bass?
No. But I think that I'm just saying, like, I literally fall out of caring about guitars for years, and just watching that inspired me again to want to play guitar again a lot.
What guitar did you get?
I got a Jazz Master, a nice old Jazz Master, and a Casino. I've been wanting a Casino for years. Obviously, the natural one. For years, since I was 12, 13.
Is the Casino, is that Gibson or Epiphone, or Epiphone's after Gibson?
It's an Epiphone. Well, they were kind of the same time. Gibson bought Epiphone. It was made in the same factory in Michigan.
And then Jazz Master's that Leo guy.
Leo DiCaprio?
Yeah, Leo DiCaprio's building guitars.
Yeah.
Cool,
yeah,
man.
so it's just been like kind of super passionate about playing again. It's more about playing again and kind of inspiring yourself to noodle around. It's a similar thing of like getting into the video tutorial stuff, like getting your mind out of the element. Because I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I really am doing so much content right now, work, that I have to like keep myself really grounded and like try my best to not burn myself out with mixing and stuff. So that's why I was saying earlier my back was hurting, because I've been trying to do projects around the house, in my yard, a lot of yard work now, and just to keep myself completely focused, to keep things sharp when I'm wanting to be sharp. So playing guitar and, you know, making tutorial videos to help people out. And, you know,
I thought in Los Angeles, all you guys had for a yard was a little patch of dirt out by the front gate.
Yeah. I got a nice little backyard.
I'd give you my yard any day. It takes me about 6 hours to do it.
Oh man, not much grass. Lots of succulents.
Nice. So the other thought that came to mind when you were talking about the mixing stuff and, you know, having it ready to work on, when I did my Bonnaroo studio, I had an assistant, Michael Hardesty. We called him Megahertz. If you're out there, Megahertz, shout out to you. But he would help me out, and I'd go out and I'd talk to the band, because we were doing very quick turnarounds with band and mic them up in like 10 minutes. And then I'd have to mix them on the fly through a console and headphones. So I'd go talk to the band, get everybody settled. And then I loved it when I could walk in, and we had this routine where Megahertz would have already sound checked the incoming, like whatever was being played in that moment gets sound checked. And then he'd sort of quickly, roughly balance it, or just like get it up on the console a little bit. And they just hand me a pair of headphones, and I just pop them on, and it's like instantly going to mixing. And that was so much fun, and it was so productive. It was such a great way to work. And it, you know, if you can set up mixing where you've done the prep already, or somebody else has helped you with it, it also takes you out of over worrying about each sound and everything. I find myself more likely to just appreciate the whole and see where it goes.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is with the prepping, even if you're doing yourself, is to try to separate yourself from it. Because I still prep a lot of songs just because I enjoy it. It's not like I send everything over to Chris and Ryan, my guys. Chris and Ryan, if you're listening.
Shout out, Chris and Ryan.
Shout out to my guys, Chicago and Utah. Right. They get a lot, but at the same time, I really like to prep my own stuff because it's really fun. It's nice it's kind of an unwinding thing. But what I don't like doing is prepping and then mixing right away.
Right.
In the same second, in the same day. So if I'm prepping an album, which I do still, so I feel guilty just sending stuff constantly to Chris. And so I'll prep an album and then I'll send him one, but I won't work on that album for like a week or 2 or 3. It'll come in, and then like in the middle of, doing whatever I'm doing, I'll prep after dinner or something. I'll sit in my studio and I'll prep a song or two while I'm listening to a podcast or doing something, just to kind of get my head straight. But I'm not really listening to the music or even kind of soaking up any part of that. I'm just doing the process of prepping it. And then a couple weeks later, I'll start it and it'll be very fresh. But it's like that where like you turn it on and it's already rolling. Like the drums might not be mixed, but at least they're kind of balanced. And, everything is dry and flat and absolutely not right, but everything is going through the proper buses. You have your 2-bus kind of engaged, but it's inactive. The way my rig is set up, I have an entire template for stems all going in real time that are hidden in Pro Tools that I have to kind of triple check while I'm starting to make sure everything is okay. And then you start. Everything's going through the proper universe, and then you start and you put more time into the things that matter, not EQing kick drums and snares. I mean, you do, but it's just, I used to spend so much time trying to, because I think when I was young, I did the same thing. I'd listen to a song and think of a specific band or a song, and I'd want to get that snare, even though the snare was nothing like the snare I had in my head. Right. And I would spend all this time with Transient Designer, and this is sampling, just trying to get the snare to do something that it wasn't going to do. And and a lot of the times the snare is wrong for the song.
It was just the wrong instrument. Snares are funny like that. They're like, sometimes you just start recording with the band and you're hearing the song and there's just almost like no way to know. And then sometimes I find myself immediately knowing that it should be this kind of sound.
Well, it's also the fact that the drummer is so massively crucial for a specific sound. And this is something that I didn't even realize until working on the Fleetwood Mac stuff, kind of soloing Mick Fleetwood. And you think Fleetwood Mac, you think of these deep, fat snares. And there was a couple songs on Mraz that were just standard, I'm just trying to think of some snares, very normal, totally Black Beauty or something like that. Very standard rock snare. It wasn't, but it still sounded like Fleetwood Mac because Mick Fleetwood has a specific way of rim shotting.
It still went.
Well, it did that, but it also did this like super sharp transient thing that instantly made you go, okay. And I used to think, well, that has to be fat, but it wasn't even fat. It was just somehow he was hitting it. And the only reason why I figured that out was because I was listening to some multi-tracks of live stuff that they did back in the 70s. And it was there too. And I'm just like, they're not paying a lot of attention of getting the drum sounds insanely, at least for that first tour. Because once Rumors was released, that's when everything kind of went crazy on the tours and stuff. But before that, I think they were just playing. And I think a lot of that goes to that. And you do know that, like, as any kind of rock guy or whatever, that the snare and the kick are almost as important as the vocal. And same as the guitars. I mean, there's all these hyper elements that are so crucial and so hard to get right.
Yeah.
I was talking to Warren about that maybe a month ago or something, 2 months ago. We were talking about when he was recording The Fray. And that was, the first album of The Fray was kind of different than the second one. The second one kind of sounded a little more polished and stuff, but Warren's very good at recording piano rock bands, Augustine. There's all these bands that just have this sound, and I don't know how to do it. That's what I'm trying to get to. Like he's been really good at that. But a lot of it was, could have been Ben, the drummer from The Fray, has this kind of element of this specific kind of vibe of playing. And I don't know. I mean, I listen to all these records and I just go, how do they do that? And I asked the guy that did it, and they're just the same response. I don't know.
Right. Ever wonder how I get a consistent sound quality mixing hundreds of episodes of Recording Studio Rockstars? It's because I've been cheating by using Izotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on every single episode. Right now, you are hearing RX breath control, declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from Izotope. Try out the subscription option for yourself with an extended 30-day free trial at izotope.com/rockstars or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. In my studio, I chose the OWC Mini-Stack STX Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and expansion hub because it seamlessly connects to my Mac Mini M1 for my dedicated audio drives, sample libraries, and backup drives. It's the perfect size to stack with the Mac Mini and add storage and connectivity over Thunderbolt or USB. Whether you have the new or older Mac Mini, nothing stacks up in your studio quite like OWC. Find the new Mini-Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Well, I mean, that kind of comes back to this Bonnaroo example for me, because that was a studio situation where I'd have the exact same microphone set up and I might record 40 bands over 4 days or something like that. That would be our max. And so
Wow.
I'd be sitting there recording and trying to mix one band, and I was like, God, why? I'm just like the worst mixer in the world. I can't get this right. I must be terrible. And then they would finish up and walk out the door, and I'd, wipe the sweat off my brow. And then in walks another band or artist, and they just sit down at the same mics and start playing. And I was like, holy shit, that sounds great.
Yeah. Yeah, there was have you know Audio Tree, right?
I think so, yeah, but tell us again.
Audio Tree was, and still I'm assuming was this internet show in Chicago, very successful, live bands playing in the studio.
Yeah,
Rick
I pulled
Fritz
up their
was-
website. It looks cool.
Yeah, it's legit. Big bands play through it and stuff. And I remember talking to Rick Fritz about that. And, I did a PBS series. It was 26 episodes or something of back in Chicago of bands in the studio as well. And that was the big thing that I encountered too, that he was saying the same thing, which is, and you're saying the exact same thing, which is a band will come in and it will be completely different than the last band. It'd be very similar music, but just the finesse of the drummer, whatever it was, instantly either breaks or makes the song.
Yeah.
The way they play it, the way it's usually drums and bass. I mean, guitars are relative if it's a good guitar and stuff. But if you didn't know how to play drums properly, it's crazy.
Yeah, I just watched a live show where two bands played back to back, and the first band, the drummer was hitting the drums really hard. And the second band, the drummer didn't do anything nearly as flashy or fancy, but somehow just had a great sound coming out of his drum set. And it was, he was hitting them much less hard, but the whole thing was louder.
Do you have your go-to session drummer that you call when you know you need?
I don't have that luxury that much. I only occasionally get to do that. So I know a lot of great drummers in town, but I often find that if I'm working with an independent artist, one of their, strength / weaknesses or whatever is that in order for them to be able to play their live shows and go out and do their thing, they've got a band, right? And so then you're always balancing that. And I really enjoy working with drummers and, kind of going through that process of educating and everything and working out parts and pointing out how their kick was fighting the vocals instead of supporting it. And what if we tried this and everything? But it's like you doing the mixes. My energy is, a lot of energy goes into that before the record button is hit. So that can be a real challenge, you know?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the things when I owned a studio in Chicago, partner of a studio, there was a lot of songwriters. So you could always connect a specific rhythm section to them. And I did that a lot. There was no budget then.
Yeah.
And luckily, I found the drummer and the bass player, Tim Sizer, incredible bass player, John Marks, incredible drummer. John Marks is one of the best drummers I know. And he would just do it for like nickels. And the thing was with
Thanks,
John. Yeah, exactly. The thing about John was he just knew how to play so well, perfectly in the studio, that it just sounded done while it was being tracked. It sounded so perfect. It sounded like every record you think of in your head, just because he had that absolute it power. And I believe there's session drummers that don't even have that it power, that are really great drummers. But it's all about this little, I don't even know how to explain it. It's either you got it or you don't. And it's hard to explain.
Yeah, I've definitely had that happen. There's a Mike Radovsky who's here in Nashville, who I did a drum recording course with, the Rockstars of Drums course. He was like that. When I'd put mics up, his drum kit just sounded very finished all the time. And I was like,
and it wasn't even the tuning. It's just his know of how to hit specific drum parts.
Yeah.
The dynamics of how he hits the cymbals versus how he hits the snare, and how he hits the snare versus how he hits the kick, and how the kick is very smooth and even until the parts where he knows needs to be loud, like the top of each chorus. He'll hit the kick even harder on purpose to get a little more energy, and all the little finessey, automation things that spend so much time. He just does. Same as bass, knowing how to play arrangements that are just perfect. And
bass is tough, man. Do you play? So you're playing guitar. Are you messing around with drums and bass yourself to sort of explore what it feels like to be the player on that?
I used to. I mean, I can play drums and bass fine. I just haven't for years. I mean, the last thing I want to do is deal with kind of playing tons and tons and tons of music. The guitar stuff is kind of fun.
Yeah.
And going through that whole game again has been interesting, amplifiers and pedals and stuff. But it's the drum aspect of it is I'm never going to be as good as I want to be in my head.
Yeah.
And I've had many years of trying to be that, and I can do one thing really good, but I can't, it's obviously practice and stuff as well. But I do believe, I play piano, stuff like that, where it's able to be creative. I just find that being creative is way more important. I do need to get my game back, though, like the finger picking. I used to be so good at finger picking on the guitar, and now, like I was doing it the other night, I'm like, geez, I can't do it without falling off, completely falling off the bike every couple.
Yeah, your thumb
just
has to go from the A string to the E string, and sometimes to the D string.
Well, I started doing it with two fingers as a kid, because I think that's what I saw the Beatles do, Paul or something.
Oh, really? Just two fingers for finger picking?
The pointer finger and the thumb. And then, I had a teacher, not a teacher, but a good friend who was a teacher that was like, he was a super folk finger picker guy, had like a $6,000 Martin classical guitar, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So he taught me how to do the three thing, the three claw thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty good, and I got really good at it. But now, because I'm also left-handed, but I play right, so my main strength coming out of my right hand should be the left. Like in reality, I would be amazing probably at finger picking if I was playing left-handed guitar.
Just learn how to do lefty.
Because, your strength is whatever hand you have. My right is still a little weird. But like the other day, I started playing, and I'm just like, I can't even do this. I can't even barely even make it a bar without it just stumbling again. So I have to start, exercising that, practicing again.
Well, if you're still sort of alone in your space a lot, maybe now's a good time to figure out banjo too.
Oh man.
I remember when I first learned banjo, it was, I got the Scruggs book and I had to like figure out the tablature, and it was amazing. And I remember those first things I figured out. I was like, holy shit, man, it sounds like a banjo. That's bizarre. Wild.
Well, you just get the 6-string banjo.
The 6-string banjo. Yeah, there you go. I've had a lot of those come into the studio. It's basically just the guitar with the
resonator
banjo on it.
string. Yeah.
But as far as finger picking goes too, the other challenge for me was like, grappling with like, should my pinky rest on the pick guard of the guitar, or should I not rest my hand on the guitar? And I go back and forth on that. It's sort of like same thing with strumming with a pick too. There's a real difference in sound if you strum a guitar and you're sort of resting your pinky on the body of the guitar as sort of this. It's like a training wheel, And then if you can learn how to not do that and just pick, it's kind of amazing how precise you can be if you just sort of trust. It's like Luke Skywalker putting on the helmet,
Well, I think a lot of that is just, obviously just experience and practice.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to play so much piano constantly for just like at least an hour a day, at least. And, in the last year or two, none really. I mean, I have a piano in my house, but I just don't play as much. I'm trying to now.
You weren't inspired by the last wretched news clip you just watched on TV to go straight to the piano and write about it?
Yeah, exactly. But what I'm finding is like trying to play piano, I'm getting like my wrists are getting sore because my mind, it's almost like a drug addict or an alcoholic or something that when they relapse, they go right back into the pattern that they were before and their body's not used to that. So like I try to do stuff, but my hands and my wrists aren't I'm trying to do it and I can, but my muscles aren't used to it. So they get really sore. My arms.
Come on, piano's there's some serious muscle use in piano.
Yeah, I give up. And that's why I only play for like 30 seconds a month.
Yeah, but that's all right because it's like learning how to exercise. It's like if you can't do 20 push-ups, then do 10. And if you can't do 10, then do 1, and then 2 the next time or something.
But the next time should be relatively quick, not just a month or later. And that's my thing.
Right.
I've got so many little projects and little things going that I don't say, okay, I need to at least play for a half hour.
Well, I had a mentor and one of the first producers I got to work with, a guy named Ross Rice, very, very talented guy who's now teaching at university. But he told me that it was a period in his life when I was engineering for him where he was like, he was in that focus stage, and he needed to be a player in a big way. He was less focused on being an engineer, more on being a player and a producer and a songwriter. And he just said, like, I'm just trying to play an hour on an instrument every day. Kind of didn't matter to him which instrument he was going to play on.
Well, I mean, that like you can literally write a different song on a piano versus a guitar just based on the chords. I mean, I think that was what George Harrison said when he was writing Old Brown Shoe. If you watch the Get Back movie, there's a section where he's like playing Old Brown Shoe on piano. And he's like, I could never have wrote this on guitar because of the way that he does these extension chords going into minors. And it's why I think people are able to pull out specific inspiration depending on the instrument. And every time I mean, you've been there where you probably picked up a guitar and you literally, it could be a brand new guitar. You've never played it. And all of a sudden you're writing something out of nowhere because it inspires you, the way it plays or the action or something about it does something interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And
this is becoming a guitar podcast.
I know it is fine with me, man. I and many of the rock stars are musicians and songwriters at heart that really just want to make our own record, But I agree with you. There are guitars offer up sounds that can inspire you. And yet at the same time, you pick up the guitar and you put your hands to it and you're like, what strings should I put my fingers on? And then, you may be like, oh, I'll start with the A chord or the D chord, or I'll be like, oh, I'm going to do no chord. And then I look at him like, oh, dude, that's the same no chord you used last time you picked up the guitar. So that's what's nice about switching instruments, especially when you pick up an instrument, you just don't even know what the hell it is and what to do with it. It can be really fun to explore new sounds. So you just finished an awesome mix and sent it off to the band, but the singer texts you with lyric changes, the drummer emails you wanting a different fill, and the bass player DMs you about a wrong note in the chorus. But which mix version were they talking about anyway? Don't you wish there was an easier way? Samply App comes to the rescue as your ultimate mix assistant, streaming full resolution audio so your clients can easily listen and send notes from their mobile phone on the road or the computer back at the studio. All mix comments are time-stamped directly onto the correct mix version with no confusion, and you also get A/B listening capability with synchronized playback and level matching for easy mix comparison, all inside Samply. It's file sharing that was built specifically for music, and it all works inside your browser with no downloads required. Sign up now for your free account with 25 gigs of storage and unlimited projects, and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade at samply.app. 50 years ago, William G. Dilley introduced the world to his revolutionary new dynamics processor, the Model 610 Complementer. A truly unique device, the Model 610 was not only the fastest, cleanest, and quietest of its type, but was also capable of providing completely separate peak limiting and compression functions. Today, Spectra 1964 introduces the Model C610 Complementer, described as the most versatile piece of audio gear you can buy. Great for adding control and power to everything from vocals, guitars, and bass to mixing and even mastering, the C610 gives you the same massive sound that rocked legendary studios like Stax, Ardent, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant. It even has enough gain to function as a mic preamp. I'm using the C610 on every record I make at the Toy Box Studio, and you should too. You'll love it. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. Howdy, rock stars. We're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Marc Daniel Nelson, joining us from his studio in Hollywood. Marc, you ready to jam, dude?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Well, I can't even remember. Oh, I think that was my reference to 1942, the movie, where the Japanese U-boat tries to land and infiltrate the LA shoreline.
Yeah.
Cool, man.
That's a great Jim Belushi movie.
It was was that Jim Belushi? Yeah, that was. Or John Belushi. That was John Belushi. Yeah.
But it was Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, I believe, that did the movie. Back to the Future team.
Right on. Little John Belushi aside, my best friend in high school grew up on Martha's Vineyard, and he was like talking about all the stories of growing up with all these rock stars and everything coming over and partying at his house. And I think at one of them, he said, "Oh yeah, John Belushi's been over to my house.
You're kidding.
He puked in our washing machine at one party."
Oh my God.
I was like, wow, that's pretty cool, man.
That is funny.
Yeah. Anyway, John was amazing. Amazing dude. All right. So let's see. What are we going to talk about next? I would like to ask you a little bit more about setting up your mix template. I want to ask you about what some of those things are that go into the setup. And I want to ask you a pushback question on working with assistants to do something, because I think this will resonate with the rock stars who are at this point at which they're trying to do this too. If your assistants are over the internet and they're trying to help you do setup, what's a good way to do that? I mean, I remember Michael Brower sort of describing, a team viewer method and stuff like that. But I know that when I've tried to do it before, like my assistant doesn't have my plugins, so he can't necessarily get the podcast mix ready for me, for example.
Well, so the two guys that I use, I both known for many years, and I've worked in person with them for many years as well, and trust them to be as creative as they'd like to be. And they know me and my kind of sound and everything so well that they know that I would be mad at certain things and not mad at certain things. And, irritated is probably the wrong word, but just frustrated or whatever. So I think a lot of it is most of the plugins they don't have as well. Most they do have, but I mean, I have probably too many plugins to even bring up. But I think a lot of it is based on most of my templates have all these plugins already in them. And it's not necessarily about that. I don't let, or the word let, I don't expect or want things to kind of start moving once they hit plugins. All I want, for it to be is just kind of prepped into the channels that it needs to go through, the proper buses, labeled, color, grouped, and the levels, making sure that like it's an average, just really generic 10-second leveling.
Right. Okay, so as you were saying, it's sort of flat, meaning it doesn't even have to have any plugin changing the sound of that track yet.
I don't want that, because my template most of the time has the plugins already kind of starting where it needs to be. And if they're inactive, I don't do a lot on a lot of plugins. If I do, it's creative. But, the overall kind of touching and stuff, those are real subtle. So if I engage it, it's not going to explode the change too much. It might add like a dB of gain or two, but it's not going to do a ton.
Right.
And what I want is basically a session to come in if they're prepping, or if I'm prepping. I want it to come in where everything is kind of hitting -6 in general, average. The drums could be way too quiet, but it's going to the point where everything is, you can hear everything, and it's hitting around -6. That gives me enough headroom once I start engaging things and automating that I have a little bit of room before it starts getting close to 0. Sometimes I mix with a limiter on, sometimes I don't. Depends on my mood. Sometimes I change limiters. I just got in a habit of the more and more records we work on, the more they are mastered on their own versus going to a proper mastering guy, because a lot of people don't have $3,000 to send it to a superstar master.
Right. So you're
even
mixing,
if they're on a label.
You're mixing so that the end results that you finish with can sound mastered. If you want it to.
A lot of times, yes. And even if it's going to mastering, I leave it on and I just bring down the output because I want to know what it's doing. I used to never do that. If Eric Boulanger or Doug Sachs were going to master the track, you would let Eric do his thing. He would know how to obviously clip, convert, whatever the way, use the proper cheese to get the snare to stay through. But what I found was a lot of other guys, they like to be creative and they have their own kind of sound in their head of how the drums should sit in a mix. And I'm very specific to that. Like I'm known for having drums be a little too loud and a little too dangerous.
Nice.
And so like, I like to make sure that, okay, I've got enough level. This is commercial level. I know what this limiter is going to do to these snares and kicks and drums in general. So what I'll do is most of the time, if I know it's going to a different mastering guy, that I'll give him 2 versions. I'll give him a version without the limiter, and then I'll give him a limited version just brought down in level, and meaning the output only. So it's actually compressing, but it's not loud, basically. Mm-hmm. So they can still do what they do. If they bring it up to level, it's still hitting under 0. But that allows them to say, okay. And most of the time, I'm not kidding, most of the time they choose the limited version because they just like the sound of it. It's glued already. It sounds really well put together. I've got a nice pickup converter that kind of handles clipping into it pretty nice. So sometimes I just do that as well, kind of pushing it in a little bit.
When you say pickup converter, you mean the converter, meaning you go out analog, and I think we'll talk about this in a moment, your SSL Sigma setup, but you break it out into the analog world and then recapture it back in on a converter, and that's what
I call it a pickup.
The pickup.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
It's just the capture converter.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, we can stay on this for a moment, but I was thinking about stuff that your assistants do in prepping. Is it sometimes clip gaining? Is that sort of an appropriate part of the prepping process, or is that getting too deep into it?
No, I think that's important because I actually like clip gaining more than noodling with faders.
Yeah.
And I don't like to engage the automation unless I know it's needed. So a lot of the time I'm just doing automation in the clip gain, believe it or not, and not even touching. I wish, and maybe there is a way, someone email me, I wish there's a way to automate clip gain, like with a fader. Because I tend to do that more than anything, which kind of creates a little bit of different sound when you're going into compressors and stuff. But I don't know. I like it. It's a little cleaner that way visually.
Yeah.
Instead of having automation lines over everything.
Well, it's nice to be able to hit a mute button on a track and have it stay muted for a minute.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
But no, I don't know of a way to automate the clip processing, clip effects. But I do know that clip gain, you can do the clip line and kind of get in there. And I think I actually did a ton of that on my Rockstars of Drums remixing, and it was just pulling my hair out. It was so hard to do. But it is a kind of a handy thing to have sometimes. But I like just clip gaining, just like take a section or a segment or something, especially like places like a kick drum. You talked about a great drummer knowing how to have the verse level and then have just the right accent on the downbeat of the chorus. That's wonderful. But a lot of times I get a kick or a snare level that's kind of in the wrong place in different sections of the song, or some of them get too loud and the kick, I hear that. I hear those moments of the kick drum in a mix and I'm like, God, that sounds horrible. But if I went and changed the whole kick drum sound, it would sound terrible for the majority of the song. So it's great to be able to just go in and like clip gain those 4 kicks that were just way too loud in a section of a song and bring them back down, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then vocals, obviously too. But I still, I feel like I'm still in that learning stage of like how to really dial in a vocal from clip gaining all the way through the, processing and multiple processing and have that kind of super in your face pop vocal sound.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of it could be arrangement. There's so many little variables, I guess, that kind of add up. And I was mixing something yesterday that I'm not going to say the name, and it's not even well known. The artist is just, an indie artist and stuff. And it was so frustrating because I could hear the potential in it. And there were so many conflicting issues with the arrangement, and it could have been so much better, but it really fought for that. And they were really happy with where things were at. And it just was just like, oh man, this could have been so much easier or better.
I know that feeling. When I work on stuff, sometimes I grapple with that. And I think that's one of the learning lessons we have to go through as mixers or producers, where we're like, in this particular situation, I need to just let go of that, they want to do their thing. And my job is to just make their thing sound as good as I think I can get it. And then that's where it's going to end up. And then there are other times where I realize that, what that thing is that they want to get, it might be totally worth getting. And I just don't understand it yet,
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. So with your mix prep stuff, so they're sort of routing things, getting things color coded and organized. And then you can...
I like to keep things, no matter what style the song is, or my groups are always the same color. I mean, these are things that I've already said in many different interviews and stuff.
Yeah, totally.
But I think it's important to say it that, you get into a system where your mind knows what's happening before you even look for it.
Well, here's a question that might not have been asked. Because I've heard so many people talk about color coding stuff, one of the questions we have is like, is one of these the right color code? So do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I mean, it's like the lighter thing when, back in the 90s when everyone smoked and everyone said, don't use the red lighter. I mean, I think it's the preference. I know people that think drums should be blue. My bass is dark blue. My drums are red. I mean, for me, it's always a followed same color, but I think it's preference.
Yeah, whatever you want.
It's instinct of knowing it. And honestly, I had to make habits based on that. For a while, I had brass as green, and then it became orange because I'm like, why isn't brass orange? They literally are orange instruments. It's like they literally what was my problem? So I started doing that, but for 4 or 5 months, my mind would still almost go to green. It took a while, and you just have to get into that swing. And then once you're in it, it's all instinct. I mean, that's the same as if Chris preps a session, he'll know. And if I get a new update of a template, I always send it to them, but they'll know relative. And I'm always evolving and changing my outputs and changing the IOs around and testing new converters and testing all these things and seeing what sticks. But everything kind of adapts. And then you have to go through the process of saying, okay, this is why I use this. This is why I don't use outboard gear except for the 2-bus, even though I own a lot of it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I use it, but most of the time it's just for tracking or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a good reminder so we can come up with our own colors, which is freeing. And I guess, for those of us who are just sort of trying to arrive at our template, maybe we just try some colors until we decide which ones we like. One of the things that I started using recently is the Avid S1 controller, and the color of that track will show up in the button below the fader. And I've realized that while I can have a deep variety of colors in the on the Pro Tools screen, there's very limited variety of colors that will actually show up on those buttons. So there's just stuff like that we all need to figure out for our own setups.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's preference. Yeah. A lot of it. It's just like gear. Some people like SSL bus compressors and some people like Fairchild.
Look, it might be hard to describe in a few words what gives records a legendary sound, but it would be pretty easy to describe in a few letters: API. For more than 50 years, API Audio has created large format consoles for world-class studios. Famous for co-founder Saul Walker's circuit designs and original 2520 op amp, the sound of API consoles is the sound of great music. API now brings that legendary sound to your home studio with The Box, a small format console featuring the famous API circuitry that is the perfect analog addition to your digital studio. The Box gives you 8 recording channels on the left with built-in mic pre's, high-pass filters, direct inputs, customizable 500 module slots, and 16 summing channels on the right. Or you can mix using all 24 channels, including aux sends, inserts, and silky smooth faders. API now offers a virtual console experience with a personalized online demo of the Box, 16082, or 2448 console. Sign up for your demo now at apiaudio.com. Atom Audio introduces the new A7V monitor for home and pro studios, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. The all-new A-series line of monitors delivers the same highly accurate, transparent sound and unique accelerated ribbon tweeter design that has made Atom Audio famous for over a decade, but now includes new innovations, such as the rotatable high-frequency propagation system waveguide, allowing the XART tweeter to disperse sound with controlled consistency. and DSP-based room correction and speaker voicings. Using the A-Control software or SonarWorks and Measurement Mic, you can now integrate advanced filters directly to the DSP onboard the speaker to help compensate for imperfect room acoustics without introducing annoying latency or requiring plugins. This allows you to tune your monitors for your room, your mix position, and your ears anytime you want to meet your ever-evolving studio needs. Get the extended 5-year warranty for monitors that will improve as your studio improves at adamaudio.com. Speaking of SSL, that was another thing I wanted to talk to you about. I think last time you said you were using something called the SSL Sigma for summing and mixing. And I went through a big change in my studio over this past year where I actually moved my old analog console out, the custom built MCI, very famous console. I moved it out, made the decision to modernize my mixing because I found myself mixing in the box so much. But before I did, I just said, and I did this very quickly. I was like, all right, dude, just do a real quick mix in the box, do a real quick mix, break it out through the console, not even fancy or anything, and see what you see. And what I found was the console, going out had an excitement to it that I just couldn't figure out how to replicate. I could make something I could do something that had some pretty good qualities for mixing it in the box, but I couldn't get the same thing. And part of that thing was like a depth to the bass, an openness and depth, and sort of like a 3D width to the sound. And I wondered if that was something, if you had any thoughts on that, if there are qualities of the mixing through the Sigma, and what are things you see?
Oh yeah. I mean, I spend every moment of my life thinking about, do I really need to go out? I have too much money in going out, but there's a reason why you do it. And I don't do it all the time. Like some stuff does not sound good going through outboard gear and going through summing and going through the whole chain. It really does well with the sharpness and the tightness of in the box. But the thing about summing, and there's a lot of people that think it's hocus pocus, but I think they're deaf because it's very obvious going between the couple different options. And I've used and owned so many different types of summing mixers, just trying and spending time with them, that I do feel like I have a very good understanding about what is doing what and what is good for what. The Sigma I've had for a couple years, and it does something very different than anything else. And traditionally an SSL isn't the most larger than life, pure, massive, open sounding unit. But the one thing it does do is it creates this magic that you cannot get, no matter how good you are, in the box. And if you can, it's going to take you way too much time. And if you can, please email me or call me and tell me, because I would love to know. I am not like one way or the other. I change depending on the day or the project. But the SSL always has this thing where it just instantly sounds different, better, more pleasing. Those adjectives you used about explaining how it reminds you of it being 3D or fat or wide. Those are
crispness on top, like an immediacy of the high end.
I just almost feel like you take it out of this. I feel like in the box is kind of static and very sterile. And that can work really well with orchestra stuff and things that need to be very kind of precise. But the SSL Sigma seems to be very different in that when you send things through it, obviously it's shaving off some top end and some transient to the point where it bothered me in the beginning. So the Sigma in general, against anything else I've used, is probably the most closest to a console I've heard on a summing mixer. And that being said, a lot of summing is just that they put out is just almost like makeup amplifiers going through transistor or whatever they're not, there's not a lot of electronics going through the channels until it hits the 2-bus on a lot of these summing mixers. And I think that's why they're not very special. They're not doing amount of things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put transformers on every channel. I think it just means that there needs to be some specialness or whatever is going on. I don't know what's happening under the hood on a Sigma. I think they're like little VCAs, just like the console, right?
Of
course, yeah. And there's a ton of electronics on every channel, and that's probably not great for high fidelity, but it's weird how I can get a bigger than life sound through that than going straight wire out.
Right.
And it's the depth, and it's the way things sit. And the way my Pro Tools template is that I literally have my insert on my final master fader that can go in and out active-wise. And if I'm out, it's fully digital mix. And if it's in, it's fully summing.
Okay, so somewhere in your template in the routing, the buses are going straight to the stereo, the digital stereo master fader, but they're also going to outputs that hit
all my Sigma. Buses are multed, so my buses are going digital to the digital fader, and then they're also going to their outputs of their analog counterpart. So the insert, which is the pickup converter, if it's inactivated, it's just digital. Everything's digital. It's an in-the-box mix. If I activate that insert, it's the print of my analog summing.
That's wild, man. So you just get instant comparison. And I think
exactly.
I think you talked about that in one of your videos, possibly, was it, where you were talking about stuff you learned from Doug Sachs and about that need to very critically and quickly compare things, right?
Yeah, I think it's just that whole mentality of being able to not move your head when you're A-Bing. Because you can move your head a little bit and you hear things a little differently. Or if you turn the volume down or level match. The only issue with that is there's a tiny bit of delay because it's going out into converters and then back. So there's a little bit of a delay, but that's okay. Because if you get used to it and you understand that it gives you a little second to process as well.
Right.
So, but I usually know just listening to the song if it's going to go in or out. And I don't really go between. It's rare, maybe once in the last year, that I've actually mixed for a while and then decided to go one way or the other. It's usually just quick.
Yeah. Well, now my understanding about what the Sigma does is it's a summing mixer, but it also gives you automatable access to those VCAs where you could. So how do I say this? If you were trying to mix in Pro Tools and you went traditionally to a summing mixer or broke it out to a console, our first thing that we would find ourselves doing is saying like, oh, let's take the vocal and run it out through our 1176 again and EQ, we'll get a cool sound. But then when you want to do the automation levels on that vocal, you discover that when you move the fader in Pro Tools, all you're doing is pushing it harder into the compressor or less hard. And so the level of the vocal never actually changes in the mix. But with the Sigma, you have that VCA control where you can actually control the level of that fader. Is that something that you get into at all or have tried, and have you found that to be useful?
Yeah, I mean, you can basically, it's a plugin. So you have 16 stereo faders on a plugin in your Pro Tools session that triggers your analog VCAs of the mixer, just like a fader would, but you're controlling it with a digital fader, and it's analog. So it's post all the inserts, it's post everything. So it's a little, console in a box.
Where do you actually write that automation?
You can write it in Pro Tools.
So it looks like a fader volume in Pro Tools, but it's...
Yeah.
I guess I can't quite picture how it all adds up, but
because
I get
it's
the
sending
concept.
MIDI information is what it's doing.
Oh,
so
I
it's
got you.
digitally controlling an analog VCA. I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong. I think a lot of it is just trying to, use digital MIDI information to trigger or control analog. And doing that, I leave all my stuff at 0 and I just do digital because I don't do inserts anymore. My setup goes like this. It goes 12 to 16 stereo buses. They go out to the summer. From the summer, it goes directly hardwired into an API. And I do have a mastering switcher with 6 stereo switches that have one flip that I can basically say, I want my two-tech, or I want my Fairchild, or I want my Shadow Hills. But I really relatively use just the API and the Fairchild lately. And so that just goes straightly back into the converter, pickup converter. And then that's it. I don't touch any aspect of that because I don't even touch my EQ. I only touch my threshold on the compressor, and that's dependent on the music. So everything's kind of set.
So the compressor is an API and the EQ is an API, or it's whichever combo you feel like using?
EQ is API 5500. I have a analog AT101 Fairchild analog bugger, 30 tubes, whatever the heck it has, and it's insane.
Nice.
But I got a couple other compressors I use depending on what the sound is. Sometimes I'll use a Tube Tech. Sometimes I use in the box compression with analog summing. Believe it. Because it sounds different.
What are some useful EQ curves for us to explore if we're thinking, it sounds like everybody's maybe using EQ on the mix bus. Where would we begin if we want to explore that stuff?
I mean, I don't know. I think it's all relative to what you hear. I mean, I just do the cheap way of just adding, it's almost like a back EQ where you're adding top end and low end. It's because I use top end and low end on almost every channel anyways. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm always boosting 10K or opening everything up. And for specific instruments, I'm always adding a little bit of 50 or 60 hertz and bass or drums or whatever. So on my 2-bus EQ, I always just always have it 2 dB at 50, 2 dB at 10K. And it's pretty light-handed. I mean, it's enough to go, oh, it opens things up, clears things out in a little bit in the middle, but it's pretty, I keep it in very early too. So I don't have to open up EQs when I don't need it. If it's just like a cymbal that I would like a little top end, it's already there kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an old Al Schmidt trick, or a lot of older engineers like to do that because it's just kind of a polish, almost like a pre-master where it kind of opens things up nicely. I really like the amplifier and the op-amp sound on a API 5500 as well. It just has a super great analog sound to it. And it's not too overbearing, where it definitely fattens things up and puffs it up a bit, but it doesn't do it in a way that you have it on every single channel, and it's really starting to oversaturate.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm pulling that up. So the 5500 is a single rack, and it basically has two 550 EQs in it or something, the 3-band. Or is that the 4? That's the 4. Okay, great.
Yeah. But cool. They're all stepped, and they have a range thing, so you can click down to 0.25, quarter of a dB.
Nice.
Basically. So you can set it at 2 and then range it. So if you don't need it that aggressive, and I don't really touch any of that because it's funny how everything seems to need a little bit of openness and a little bit of bottom, no matter what. And if it's just shifting things, and that was another thing that, Eric Boulanger and the Mastering Lab crew, learned from Doug Sachs, which is, it's not about necessarily adding EQ as much as it's about shifting things around a little bit with certain EQ. And because it's almost in impression, where it's like if you feel like you've got a little too much 100 hertz, you could just add 50 and it shifts it. It's just EQ is really cool like that.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that's a good takeaway to remember is when you put a little bit of an EQ on the stereo mix bus, it affects every instrument that's coming down the mix. So rather than feeling like you need to bring up the highs and the lows on every instrument, you might discover, oh, this feels all right now. And also, I think that theoretically it can actually add cohesion to the phase of everything because you're not EQing every single track separately.
Yeah.
At least that's my theory. I don't know if that holds up in
I think it does
laboratory.
help. I do think that helps. I'm just lazy. I don't feel like turning on a bunch of EQs to only add a shelf. I do also use, the ATR UAD plugin. There's a top band on the repo head.
Mm-hmm.
That's just EQ from the tape machine that I really like the sound of. And that goes up and down depending on the song. So if I feel like the overall sound is a little too bright on a mix, I just bring that back on the tape machine, on the digital tape machine, on the UAD plugin.
Yeah.
And it's nice. It just brings everything into a pocket.
I've been using the Izotope tape emulator a lot lately, and it's really fun to be able to dial in the gain and the bias, just under biasing it. All of a sudden, things get a little bit more exciting. I don't know, it just feels a little bit more like a rock record at times, and then the low and the high boost and all that stuff. It's pretty amazing how well that stuff works, but it's a really good reminder too, what you were saying about, the importance of really being able to critically A/B things and don't shift your head. We're so easily fooled in the studio. I think about all the times where somebody's like, hey, what do you think of this? And what about that? And then it's like, maybe they're actually trying to fool you. And it's kind of a waste of time when you're doing listening tests, because we're all a bunch of dummies and we can easily be fooled by sounds. And so it's really critical to do sound comparisons in such a way that you're making it really easy to not be fooled. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, 100%. 100%.
And so with the tape stuff too, it's fun to get in there and start messing with it and everything. But again, we have to have that fresh ear to just compare before and after and go is this really better? Or did I just change it a bunch?
Yeah, I think that's the other thing about a lot of these plugin companies. They aren't doing a terrible amount. They might just be changing things a little bit, and your mind instantly thinks it's better because you're used to hearing. And most of the time it isn't. And I fall for it all the time still. I'm like, well, is that better? You want it to be different, so it's better because it's changed. And it could be something as little as just rolling off a little top end, and you think it's better because the graphic GUI or whatever it is making you believe it's even better.
OWC now brings you the Mini Stack STX, the world's first Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expander, perfectly sized to stack with the Mac Mini and the ideal storage and connectivity companion for Thunderbolt or USB-equipped computers and devices. With a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, you can expand your Mini's storage capacity to gigantic proportions. 3 Thunderbolt USB-C ports enable you to connect to millions of Thunderbolt, USB, and future USB 4 drives, displays, AV mixers, cameras, and tablets, as well as desktop accessories like a keyboard, card reader, or mouse. I'm using the Mini Stack STX paired with my Mac Mini M1 to house my dedicated audio SSD and sample libraries, and it works great in my studio. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Have you ever wished you could remove the click track bleed from a singer's vocal mic, the sound of shuffling feet from a full choir, or clicking noises from the valves of an otherwise brilliant trumpet solo? These are just some of the incredible things I have been able to clean up, edit, or remove from a recording using the magic of Izotope RX. Great for mixing with a collection of plugins for your DAW to manage plosives, clicks, S's, noise, buzz, reverb, breaths, and even guitar fret squeaks. With the set it and forget it simplicity that lets you focus on your creativity in this studio while you let Izotope handle the audio challenges. You can even adjust your vocal, bass, and drum levels inside of a finished stereo mix using the wizardry of rebalance. RX is truly magical. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at izotope.com/rockstars or use the coupon code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. So one of the tips that can be really helpful, Rockstars, is when you get new plugins, EQs, and compressors and things like that, create your own starting default where you actually level match something going through it so that when you engage it, like you're talking about, Mark, you're saying if you engage it, it doesn't change it yet.
Yeah.
And, for example, like, I don't want to totally pick on one, but I know that my CLA classic compressors, when they come in, if I engage them, they make things louder. So if I want to be able to judge the two, then I could run a 1K tone at the beginning of the first plugin slot, run it through that compressor and dial it into where it's not making any difference in output when I engage it or don't engage it, and like let that be my starting point. Do you do that with any of your plugins, or have you already got them sort of in good starting places?
No, you got to get crazy. And I spend almost half my days just going through presets just to hear what people hear, because half the time mistakes are what you're getting your kind of tricks from.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I'm just like, geez, there's so many plugins out there, and finding the time to go through all of them. I mean, that FabFilter Pro Q3 has some bizarre presets that the expansion, if you just click it and you look at it, you're like, no way. Because it's like expanding 20 dB, and just the way it's doing it, because it's doing mid-side, so only pulling the mids up. It's like, oh, wow, that's super cool. But you would never do it. I mean, I even think Michael Brower even said that, like, finding plugins by mistake are like the best thing, because like you click on it and you're like, oh, that's not the one. Sorry, shoot. And you're like, well, that's kind of cool. That sounds kind of cool. And all of a sudden you put that in your template because it's totally different and new. And that's the cool thing about plugins, is that you can find things that you would never do. So I think just taking that, that chance to just really go after stuff and be a little weird, don't do stuff, be a little dangerous. I try to do that with samples too, because I have specific samples I try to stay with. But then sometimes I just get lost in the sample folders trying to go, oh, that's cool. That's cool. Ooh, that's neat. So take a little time to go through some presets and stuff that you never really, don't really want to take time to do. Just try it, because that's how you kind of pull yourself out of those funks.
So I was mentioning sound flow when we started this, and I think you said that wasn't something you were getting into much yet, but I just had an idea for a cool, probably be really hard to design, but a macro for a Pro Tools session called the plugin randomizer. Wouldn't it be cool to take a whole session and just hit a button and have it randomly select plugins on every single track and then just see what happens,
Until I do that in the middle of a song by accident.
Right.
And somehow it crashed all the other backup saves.
Or takes out the speakers.
I can't tell you how many times I'm working and then I hit the wrong key function to do group outs, and I end up sending like all my entire mix through random outputs, and I try to go backwards, and I did something right before it that I didn't save that was really special, and blah blah blah.
Yeah, I know. And then that always brings up the question of like, okay, so you go into preferences in Pro Tools and you set your autosave backup increment, like it defaults to 5 minutes, or maybe now it's 2 minutes or something. But I'm always like, I'm going to be pissed off if I even lost the last minute. So maybe I should put it there, you know? When are we going to get to like, I don't know, maybe we'll attach it to the Ethereum blockchain and it'll back up every 15 seconds while you're working.
Yeah.
All right, I'm getting geeky here.
No, you could totally. That's the thing. Maybe Andrew will figure that out. I think he's been really. It sounds like he's been really diving into like writing code and getting into the stuff that's super custom. And in fact, my mind just doesn't go there. I mean, I would love to just sit and just have think tank sessions with a bunch of guys that just like, what would be the best macros for things that we spend hours a day doing and we just get used to doing, and where we don't have to.
Breathing. We're gonna invent a breathing macro.
Exactly.
A bathroom break macro. No, then we'd never get up out of our chair. We need to do that. So we're going to invent a get up out of your chair macro. That's what I'm ready for.
It'd be like Wally. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So where does that take us next? I mean, you know, you maybe is there anything more you want to say about going through the Sigma, and like what are some things that you hear from that? But I mean, I guess it's hard to distinguish one thing out of that whole pack because you've also got compression and the EQ.
Well, I can explain a little bit about the kind of summing mixers I've used in the past and why this one has kind of stayed. Originally, I used a console. I used an MCI like yours. I liked it, but then I was starting to work on more projects that needed to be switched around on recalls and stuff more and more. This was, 2006, 2007. So I looked into a summing mixer for the first summing mixer I bought, where I would have a console for tracking and then I could switch over with a ribbon cable to a summer. So I could always have everything at 0 unity. I had a API 24 channel custom summing mixer that had 2520 op amps on every channel and transformers on every channel. And it was great. It sounded really good. Had a little bit of a noise thing because there was so much, it's like a console because it had, op amps and transformers on every channel times 24. And it was good. But then of course, like everything, we always want something different after a couple of weeks. We get sick of it. So I think I had that for 2 years. And then I actually used a ton of different ones. I, at the time, was able to basically, I was trying so much gear, and GC Pro at the time was really great, and Vintage King was really great at letting me really, really, really digest equipment.
Well, that early 2000s, that was sort of the era of the introduction of the summing mixer, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there was obviously summing forever, but I think things started to get smaller and smaller.
Yeah. I just mean summing, where it's designed, where it's intended that you're going to go.
Yeah, a lot of people did it and made them. So I've used everything from the Burl to the R&D Neve to the AMS Neve to the Thermonic Culture to the something. I mean, I've used so many different summing mixers, Dangerous. Mm-hmm. And they all sounded pretty cool. And they all kind of did what you wanted them to do. But I was always missing, I don't really know how to explain the sound. And it was really hard to explain till you heard it. And a lot of it was that depth, or the effortless effect, where it just sounded different. Because I feel like a lot of these, the Thermonic Culture was so beyond colored, because the Fat Buster was so tubey sounding, right, that it was amazing, except for on 70% of music. Right. So for what it was good on, it was perfect. And like, in fact, if I ever had a chance to get another one again, I probably would, just for the music that I would use it on. But I've used it on stuff that I shouldn't have, and I listen back and I'm like, why did I not just mix in the box? Because it's so colored. And I think I was just trying to look for something that made things bigger sounding, but made it sound more like the records I grew up listening to. I really, really liked, where I don't know if it was rounding off transients. I don't know if it was darkening things. I don't know if it was depth. But it was a lot of different things I had in my head.
Yeah.
And I went through a lot of different summing mixers, and the Sigma was an accident because a friend of mine said, I know you don't want to use summing with a SSL because you're trying to get things bigger. And I don't know if this does that, but if you want to borrow mine, you can. And at the time I was mixing on a Neve Genesis console for a couple of years, just had it tracking and stuff. And I didn't like the sound of that. It was a little hard. It sounded hard to me. Mm-hmm. And so I used the Sigma, and it was amazing. And I was like, okay, that's the first thing I've used in a long time that just sounds in a little mixer, sounds like it. And to be honest, I don't even use anything else but the summing now. And I would still probably pay that rate, the same price, because it's expensive. But I believe that just the summing alone is so impressive on top of things. Now, there are other summing mixers that are out there that I'm very keen about. Mm-hmm. The Cappy API summing mixer I'm very keen about. Just because it's a little cleaner API.
Okay.
So, then there's a couple other ones that always pop up here and there. I'm like, oh, that would be neat to hear. Like the Great River one or the Chandler. But I believe some of those might just be too heavy-handed. On top of it, I almost believe that whatever happens after the summing with your compression, your EQ, the converter, all these elements are going to influence the sound of the summing as well. So they all play together. And I'm scared if I change out one thing, it's going to make everything else not behave well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's nice to have a system that's working.
Well, you see these guys, that just don't leave their system. Guys that stay on an SSL console because it just works. Why change? I mean, same down to like, I don't know, Al Schmidt would literally mix into a Tube Tech and use an Air EQ for the top band. And for years and years, same kind of setup. Because it worked, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I've got to get my head around that like I'm happy with the way it works. And I try other things and new things, and you get that shiny new thing and you think it's better, and then you sell something for it and then you regret it. Going, I don't know if I really needed to get rid of that last thing because I don't know if this new thing is better or even as good. And so you got to be careful with doing that. I mean, if you feel like things are going well, start focusing on other aspects. Your monitoring specifically, that should be way more important than any piece of gear. This is how you're hearing stuff.
Yeah. Well, I was feeling that way. I was feeling nervous about getting rid of my console. I wasn't mixing through it because it wasn't really designed in my situation to break out a big mix and recallability. But I had done enough mixing through it that I was like, man, that sound, So I had that nervous feeling, but then I knew I was trading up for something that I was going to really appreciate having. So now, to me, ergonomics is a really important part of the process too, because if I can't be there, then no records are getting made. You know what I mean? So
this is how I feel about consoles. I feel that in 2022, a mixing console, even for tracking, it makes sense if you're doing a lot of tracking and such. But if you're really focusing on mixing, I don't know if it makes sense anymore. It certainly isn't for me, it isn't as impressive as it used to be. Now I know, like, inspiring yourself to get yourself into that headspace. Okay, you walk in your room and you're like, yeah, that's badass. Yeah, that's cool. I can do this.
I still smell the smoke from the 70s.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of that is happening, And when you lose a console, you feel like, oh, mentally you're not inspiring. You're sitting on a desk with a little fader and like, oh, that's not very rock and cool. But like, I just believe now control rooms should be more about the creative environment and not necessarily a recording studio environment. Because thinking about all the control rooms in the last 15 years, 20 years, they're all this very specific looking thing. It's this console in the middle of the room, and there's these, walls that are doing what they do, and then there's racks of gear doing what they do. And it's always relatively similar depending on what studio you go into.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really inspiring. It's inspiring in the sense of historical reasoning. Oh, you're in Blackbird. You're hanging out in Blackbird at Studio A, and it's very cool. But in reality, like, I want to go into a room that's almost, I don't want to use the word man cave because it makes me want to throw up, but I want to go into a room that makes me feel creative and has everything around me. I had a studio, my mixing room last year was in a bigger room than it is now. The room now is almost half the size of what the other one was. But I chose it in a smaller room because I wanted to be in a workspace that in my chair, I can spin around and touch everything I need to touch, including my dog. My other space, my dog was literally way on the other side of the room on a couch. And in order for me to do anything, I'd have to get out of my seat and touch it. And now literally in front of me, I have all my stuff. To the right of me, I have compressors. To the back of me, I have compressors. To the left of me, I have a Tascam 388 tape machine that is hardwired into my converters that I can print stuff to on, analog tape for fun and sounds. And it's just being really creative. And everything is in touching distance. And you walk in and it's this creative environment versus it being a sterile recording studio with a large console. That is cool, but not necessarily sonically good either, if you think about it. Giant, and I'm sure the second you took that out, you're like, wow, this sounds way different.
Oh, my room sounds amazing now. It sounds so much better than it ever did. And my level of excitement, having put in this new Phantom Focus system and getting the room dialed in, getting the speakers aligned right and everything, and finally being able to sit in the mix position and trust what I'm hearing. It's just like, now I feel like you. I'm like, okay, now I don't want to move from this spot. I don't want to have to get up and go over to the mic pre even to make a change because I won't hear the same thing. But I think I can manage that. And I'm using the the desk controller tools now with the S1s, and I have the SSL UC one, and I'm exploring using the SSL Channel Strip 2 plugin on mixes. And it's a lot of fun to be able to work like that and really kind of fly around and hear stuff right away. When you talk about not wanting to move from your spot, or rather, it's not that you don't want to move, it's just you want to have everything in reach, And it reminds me of the stories I heard about Prince, who had set up his control room chair to where the guitar was always right there. And there was a vocal mic that I think like came up over his head and down right in front of his voice so that he could immediately sing while sitting at the console.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that goes into the whole traditional value of me being used to going into a control room and there's a rack of gear behind you, a producer's desk behind that, and a console in front of you. And like in reality, you usually in these larger dinosaur studios, you have these side carts for Pro Tools and you're facing away from the speakers. And it's just like, that made sense in 2003 when people were still mixing on the console and you had a tape op, because I was in 2001, 2000, I was a tape op for Pro Tools where I was next to them and the guy was mixing on the console. But most of the time,
something like that too.
Yeah, most of the time now everyone's doing everything. So it's like having that option of not having the option of being able to hear everything correctly in the sweet zone at all times is very manipulative, because you can go and change something and then all of a sudden, as you know, you could literally move over 15 inches and all of a sudden 50 hertz comes up. So it's like you you think you inspire yourself differently. It's not good.
Yeah. Do you want to record killer drums in your home studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with examples from a Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Do you want to know how to master your own music at home? Rockstars of Mastering will show you how with plugins in your DAW so that your music will sound awesome when you finish your mixes. And if you're looking for a step-by-step solution for a pro-sounding mix that won't take years to learn, the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass with Craig Alvin will show you a proven method for creating Grammy-winning quality mixes that you can apply in your home studio right now. Or if you just need to learn the fundamentals of creating a great sounding mix, then register for my free course Mix Master Bundle to get great mixes using simple free plugins. And get started now making your best record ever at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy. Use the code ROCKSTAR at checkout to get 10% off any course for a limited time. Well, I mean, I'm noticing with my setup, which of course sounds very laser beam focused, literally, and this got this great width and depth to it, that the center image, if I close my eyes, just a little bit of head movement and stuff like that can shift that center image slightly. And it doesn't really bother me or anything, but what it does is it makes me realize just how much the physical nature of what we're doing in that moment affects what we're hearing, you know?
Yeah, it's tricky.
Well, we're coming up near the end of the show here, so let me jump to our usual closing question and hit you with this one more time, Mark. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine and you're going to go back in time. How far do you want to go back? You want to just go back 3 years or something?
Oh, you choose a year, 5 years, 10 years. Yeah. Whatever.
Okay. Well, let's just say you're going back a handful of years and you're finding yourself and you say, listen, dude, here's the world's going to be different soon. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself on the other end. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself?
Don't do things in terms of try to trust your instinct, in the sense of, if you really like a specific type of music, but it's not nearly as cool as it used to be, don't worry about that. Stay with it. Like, just follow whatever you love. I can't tell you enough about how important that is, because there's so many things that are trends that it might fade out or something, and then you lose interest because you feel like it's not getting the exposure or the attention it used to. And then it comes back, because of course it does. But then you're not nearly as sharp as you used to be. And I don't know. It's kind of, I feel like with COVID and everything, there's a lot of things that you not take for granted, but you look back and go, man, that I should have done more of that or something. And I think a lot of it is just re-listening to old music and stuff. It reminds me of, like, why don't we have more bands playing 4-piece rock and roll and stuff like that? So I think a lot of engineers I talk to are so worried that, like, everything is just going to go to rap and pop. And because it used to be just all these players playing and stuff. And it's like, dude, don't worry about that.
Yeah.
There's plenty of people making music that is bands, and bands will never die. I mean, I just saw this video with Machine Gun Kelly and Travis, what's his name, from Blink-182, and Willow
Travis
Smith.
Barker, is that right?
Travis Barker on drums, and then Willow Smith singing. And it sounds like a Blink-182 song from 2002. And it's brand new. And so it's like they're doing that again. And that's great. So just know that there's, hopefully that will put a trend out there of people playing instruments again. I mean, the key is just do what you believe in doing. Don't let anyone else tell you that, like, that's not cool or that's not relevant. Like, if you love rock and roll, if you love metal, if you love rap, if you love hip hop, just do what you love doing. Put a lot of attention to that. But always know that, like, trends happen, they come and go. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that, in a nutshell, do what you love.
yeah, I love it. Well, the come and go part too. The nice takeaway is like, it can be here, it can be a trend, it can go, but it's going to come back again. Like, that's the part that's cool. It's like the gear in the studio, which unfortunately can also be one of the reasons why we're hesitant to get rid of the old gear sometimes. But that's a whole nother topic we don't have to go into.
Yeah.
Marc, thanks so much for joining us in Recording Studio Rockstars again. Rockstars, thank you so much for listening. It's been a blast hanging out with you, dude. I love, you're so genuine and you're so into what you do that you can just start riffing, and it's fun to just hear you.
I think we spent half the time talking about guitars, which is
guitars
awesome.
rock, man. Guitars are great. That's all I want.
It's funny. You would have gotten me 6 months ago. I've been like, yeah, I've got 4 or 5 good. I don't care. And now I'm like absolutely on YouTube watching people relic their guitars because I'm fascinated about all these things, and just watching all these people going through and writing songs again. And I have to start over. It's just so exciting.
Well, that's the fun part about what we do is we have permission to just get excited about something new and devour YouTube videos about it and save up our ducats and go buy the latest instrument or whatever, or controller or synth. The challenge is always remembering to put a little bit of time after you get it into actually playing it. That's the challenge for me.
Yeah, I know, the practice.
Let the Rockstars know, where would you like them to go online to come find out more about you, check out all your work, listen to your music? What if they're ready to mix their next hit song or, blockbuster film with you?
Oh, God. Yeah, I don't know. You can go to my website, marcdanielnelson.com. I don't have social media. I don't really do that stuff. The channel, Warren's channel, Produce Like a Pro, is a great outlet for talent to kind of help people. It's all free. I try to put out a video once a month there just because it's just good. There's just a lot of people wanting to understand stuff. And I can't tell you how many years of trying to figure out certain things and not figuring it out. And this is a great avenue for people to just kind of community to get some free advice and get some inspiration. I don't know. I mean, it's a great place to be, in my opinion. That's why I'm involved in it. And cool. Warren's a really good person.
Well, we'll include links in the show notes. So Rockstars, please scroll through and click over and check it all out. And Marc, look forward to, I guess the first time we met was in person, and then it's been virtual since then, but next time, hopefully be in person again.
Yeah, I was actually almost going to be moving to Nashville. That was right before the fall. Yeah. That would have been an interesting switch out, but I'm in California now for another foreseeable future until things kind of figure themselves out. But yeah, Nashville's a great place. I really like the town. I love the people. Just a really good place.
Right on. Well,
knowing that the world's coming into a place where people are starting to get back to things. Yeah.
Well, hopefully by the time this comes out, we'll be like, we're already sick of getting together. We're ready for a break. Exactly. I'm ready for my man cave again.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome, dude. Well, thanks, man. And Rockstars, thank you for listening. And Marc, we'll see you next time, dude.
Thank you.
Cheers.
See you later. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible: API, OWC, Spectra 1964, Samply, Atom Audio, and Izotope. Remember to use these coupon codes for special discounts. At izotope.com/rockstars, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your extended 30-day free trial subscription for access to many plugins. At samply.app, sign up for a free account with unlimited projects, and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade to a pro account. At recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy, use the coupon ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course for a limited time. You will find links to all these awesome sponsors in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson, for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.